Accompong of the Maroons. Accompong is a famous town in Jamaica where the legendary Maroons defeated the British in 1738. It gets its name from the famous Maroon general, Prince Accompong. He was one of the great heroes of the Maroon Wars. Along with his family, he freed many enslaved and created a black sovereign republic that still exists to this day. Bio. Accompong is the second son of Prince Nakwan, making him the younger brother of Cudjo and the older brother of Johnny and Queen Nanny. Like his brother, he was born in the great Negro town in Jamaica between 1659 and 1670. His name, Accompong, is the Jamaican pronunciation of the Akan name for God, Nyakompong, meaning the Great One. Yet still some say it's a corruption of Acempong, another Akan name which means destined for greatness, but also one who gives birth to a king. Accompong was indeed destined for greatness. Accompong was raised in a traditional Akan community. However, there were elements of Taino, Morano, Moorish, Igbo, and Congo cultures and languages around him. The Akan and Coromantes were more numerous in Jamaica, thus the culture of the Maroons, although a mixture of all these, it was predominantly Akan. Accompong's native tongue was Twi, but as he got older, he spoke a Pidgin language known as Coromantee, which is predominantly Twi, with elements of Spanish, Arawak, Bantu, and Kikongo languages. Eventually, he would learn English, but he was never really fluent. Description: he was a tall, very dark, and well-built man. He was portrayed as being taller than Cudjo, making him around 6'1", possibly 6'4", or taller. He may have been of considerable height, as he is most famous for riding a rather large white horse. He is most remembered for wearing a black military uniform with shiny gold buttons and a pith hat. Although Maroons are often portrayed wearing loincloths or umbraje, it is not uncommon for the generals to have had access to all manner of clothing, either from the spoils of war or treasures of raid, so Accompong's uniform should come as no surprise. As a boy, his father raised him to be a Maroon warrior, training in all sorts of discipline, including traditional Akan wrestling. He also learned weapons, including the junga, which is a type of light spear for throwing and long-range combat, the afana, which is an Akan-style machete, and how to shoot the rifle and other guns that fell into the possession of Maroons. Accompong was skilled in martial arts, and he was also an excellent marksman. Yet his greatest asset was often his underrated skill as a military tactician and diplomacy. He was also a rather compassionate man. This was illustrated when they conquered Captain Shettleford's party in 1735. He was said to favor sparing the lives of the prisoners and became upset with his brother Quao, who favored the execution of prisoners. Early Maroon War. Accompong was born in the early days of the British taking over the island from the Spaniards. His father had been a buccaneer assaulting the Spanish Main. The Maroons significantly influenced the Buccaneers. In fact, the term buccaneer comes from a Taino word, bucan, which means a wooden grill made out of the Jamaican pimento tree. Meat is cooked on it, and it is also smoked with the berries of that tree, and we famously know this cooking style as Jamaican jerk. However, French pirates who frequented the Tainos and harbored many runaways adopted the form of cooking and became famous for it. And thus, during the golden age of piracy in Jamaica, the term buccaneer was coined. It must be understood that although Many of the Maroons were of African descent. The Tainos were the first Maroons and survived by mixing with the Africans. When the Spanish took the island from the Spaniards, it was with the help of a group of Maroons led by Juan de Bolis, some of them even buccaneers. After the war, however, the British sought to subjugate the other Maroons in the mountains, and they used Juan de Bolis and his Maroons to kill them off. Juan would lead his Maroons, who are now by definition black shots, which are former slaves who work as militiamen to bring in runaway slaves. He would lead his black shots to the mountains and kill off many of the Taino Maroons. Cudjoe and Accompong narrowly escaped being killed as children by Juan and his men. But Juan and his men would meet their end at the hands of another Maroon chief, who would eventually join Naquan and his Maroons. This man was known as Juan de Ceres. Despite the death of Juan de Bolis, successive British governors from 1664 to 1690 would make it a priority to try and bring the Maroons in. It is for this reason that King Naquan traveled across the island often, especially to the unsettled parts of Jamaica. And this is how Accompong came to know of the island so well, especially the west, where he would eventually settle. Thomas Montfort governed Jamaica from 1664 to 1671. While in office, he waged many unsuccessful wars against the Maroons. He had a personal reason to stop them, as he was also the owner of a 16-mile-long cacao plantation raised by the Maroons. Thomas Lynch and Henry Morgan, from 1660 to 1680, would launch assaults on the Blue Mountains again, unsuccessfully, never quite finding the great Negro town. Captain Morgan was a buccaneer assaulting the Spanish Main, much like his father, long before he was governor of Jamaica. We can't say for certain if he and Accompong's father crossed paths, but they certainly knew of him. But now Morgan was a suit and on the opposite side of the Maroons, and got smoked just like the others. John Vaughan, who governed Jamaica from 1675 to 78, would try his luck, but he soon found he was fucked like a duck who was pluck out of luck. It was during his tenure that the Maroons led the rebellion at Duck's estate. Henders Molesworth became acting lieutenant governor in 1685, and the same year had to contend with a year-long war waged by the Maroons. Soon after this, Accompong and his brothers would lead one of the most famous rebellions in Jamaica, raids. In 1690, between 300 and 400 slaves belonging to the Sutton Plantation in Clarendon, they killed all the white men entrusted with the care of it and seized upon a large store of firearms. After burning down the estate, they proceeded to the next plantation and murdered the overseers there. This rebellion was said to be orchestrated by his father, Prince Naquan, and led by his brother Cudjoe. Although it's not clear what their roles were, it's likely that Accompong and Johnny would have been part of this rebellion as well. Journey west. Before Prince Naquan passed away, he left charge of the Maroons to his sons, Cudjoe, Accompong, and Johnny. At this time, they were primarily located in the Great Negro Town and Cave River. After the Sutton Plantation Rebellion, they soon expanded from Cave River to move west and consolidated all the Maroon clans under one unified banner to better fight the British. On the journey west, Cudjoe took Accompong and Johnny with him as generals and Cuffy and Quacko as captains under them. Queen Nanny would stay behind with Quao and Kwashi. Cudjoe would strategically set up settlements in the west and put his brothers in charge of them, while he traveled across the island. Accompong was in charge of the main military base, and this encampment would eventually become Accompong Tone. Although today's Accompong Tone is a relocation from the original, with the original being known as Old Town. Accompong's military brilliance is often outshined by Cudjoe and Nanny, but it must be noted, Accompong was never conquered, and it was the site of the final victory over the British. This is why Cudjoe entrusted the West to Accompong. Minor battles. While the West was for the most part more quiet than the East in regards to Maroon activity, there was some raids and assaults carried out by Maroons in the West. The Ripon Plantation. In April 1728, Ralph Ripon, a planter of St. Elizabeth, a parish neighbor in Accompong, lost his slaves in a Maroon raid. Archduke and Pestle. In October of that same year, Archduke and Pestle plantations in central Jamaica were attacked by Maroons. They freed over 26 people, men, women, and children, in addition to stealing their goods and arms. Major battle. Accompong, Johnny, and Cudjoe favored stealth in the west, while Nanny and Quao in the east were not as quiet as Cudjoe would have liked, leading to the discovery of Nannytone. It was for this reason most of the major battles took place on the eastern side of the island, especially Nannytone. Until the discovery of the Maroon towns in the west, much of the British efforts were concentrated on Nannytone, or as it was called by the British, the Great Negro Town. Thus, Accompong would fight alongside his family to defend his hometown in some of the most historic battles. Battles such as the Battle of the Plains in 1727, Soper's invasion in 1730, the regiments from England in 1733, the Battle of the Seamen in 1734 with over 400 troops. Tired of losing to the Maroons, the British sent for what they thought were more battle-hardened troops. They called on Sir Charlotter Ogle and his seamen, who were stationed at Port Royal. Captain Ogle would send about 400 troops to a complete and thorough ass whooping. The defeat of the seamen led to widespread panic in Jamaica, to the point where slaves stopped working and temporarily took over the plantations. Shettleford, 1734, 300 troops. The captives from this battle, both black and white soldiers, were executed, and this is what caused the disagreement between Accompong and Quao. Gibraltar, 1735, 800 troops. In this battle, the British would send for 600 troops from Gibraltar, and with 200 more from Jamaica, they managed to successfully occupy Nannytone and scatter the Maroons once again. Accompong took one-third of the Maroon clans with him to Accompong. On the migration west, there were battles against British soldiers sent out to cut them off, which they successfully repelled. Mock Village, 1738. In 1738, the British had sent for 200 Mosquito Indian trackers to help discover the location of Accompong Town. So Accompong and his brothers created a mock village and lured the British and their guides into thinking they had found the village. Colonel Guthrie, thinking he had seized the town, would write about how he was now master of the town. Ultimately, when the Mosquito Indians led the British to the village, they led them right into a trap, and they were soon met with a rain of Junga spears, forcing them to retreat. They would have some success at Nannytone, but at Accompong Town they were embarrassed. They had major trouble carrying the heavy guns over the hilly terrain and couldn't outmaneuver the swift and stealthiness of Accompong and his Maroons, and they were decimated. Moortown experienced similar results. Peace Cave, 1738, 300 troops. In 1738, under the pretense of peace, the British tried to lure out the Maroons, but while passing through the cave in Accompong Town, they were ambushed. Cudjoe, Accompong, and Johnny, and about 7 or 27 other Maroons, erased from existence all 300 soldiers. This led to the official peace treaty. Treaty. In 1738, in Accompong town, the British would come to a peace treaty with the Maroons, and it is in this treaty that Accompong name is recorded as the second colonel or chief of the Maroons after Cudjoe and after him Johnny. Maroons say Cudjoe never signed the document, but instead representatives met with the Maroons and performed a blood ritual that bound them to peace. Accompong's blood was in the calabash and a part of this treaty. Post-treaty. The last detail we find out about him is from a document recorded by the British, in which he and the Maroons were gifted 2 cows, raw materials, and clothing as a sign of peace. His descendants are also of the Rowe family. Like Nanny, Cudjoe, and Johnny, his descendants took the last name Rowe. It is said that the Rowes are also related to the Wrights, the Reeds, the Foster, the Colleys, Curry, and possibly Harris. Upon visiting the cemetery of Accompong, these names rest next to each other. Accompong is said to be buried somewhere in Cockpit country. However, his grave has purposefully been obscured because in the 18 to 1900s, apparently, Ubyaman, or sorcerers, were using his grave as a site for rituals. Nonetheless, Accompong's legacy still lives on as a country within a country. It is the capital of Cockpit country, and it stands till this day as a sovereign republic. And at the time of recording, Chief Richard Curry is head of state. Accompong's spirit is said to still roam Accompong. He can be seen at night riding on a giant white horse, wearing a black military uniform with gold buttons and a pith hat. On a side note, during the Maroon Festival of 2025, while on the pilgrimage to Cudjoe's grave, there's an area that we come by and we take a stop for a moment. And every time we stop there, I feel an incredible force pulling me towards the hill there. This time around, I decided to take a trek there, but stopped myself midway. I was later informed that that is the direction of Accompong's grave. I made this video to acknowledge his contribution and honor his memory. Special thanks to my sources. In research for this topic, I resorted to my Maroon family oral history, colonial records, as well as the following books on Maroon history. The Maroon Story by Chief Bev Carey, and Cudjoe of the Maroons by Milton McFarlane, both of whom are Maroon authors. And I also used True Born Maroons by Smithsonian author Kenneth Bilby, which features many stories and quotes by elder Maroons over a 20-year period. Don't forget to smash that like button, comment, and subscribe for more.